Hi, I'm Tim Constantine, and from Washington, D.C., this is the Capitol Hill Show. President Donald J. Trump was certainly the most controversial U.S. president in at least a generation.
The office of President of the United States.
Congratulations, Mr. President. Yeah!
His surprise victory over Hillary Clinton stunned the political establishment, and he was greeted immediately by accusations he had colluded with Russia. A 2-year investigation found he had not. In fact, the story had originated in the Hillary Clinton campaign.
After nearly 2 years of investigation, thousands of subpoenas, hundreds of warrants, and witness interviews, the special counsel confirmed, did not find that the Trump campaign or other Americans colluded in those efforts.
Today, Donald Trump has been out of office for more than 3 years, yet controversy and chaos follow him everywhere he goes. He's been charged with crimes regarding classified information by the federal government in Florida. He faces unrelated charges in federal court here in Washington, D.C., and Trump's company has been charged with an assortment of fraudulent activity in New York. But wait, there's more. A state prosecutor in Georgia has accused the former president of a conspiracy to steal the 2020 election. For his part, Trump says it's all part of a political witch hunt.
This is the greatest witch hunt in the history of our country. There has never been another president, or perhaps even another politician, who has been persecuted, harassed, and in every other way unfairly treated like President Donald J. Trump.
Despite all the accusations, Donald Trump remains the front-runner for the Republican nomination for president, and he currently beats Joe Biden in most polls. But in order to win an election, you must be on the ballot. Democrats in at least 2 states have removed Trump's name from the ballot.
And this court, as directed by the Minnesota legislature in section 204B.44, must exclude Trump from the ballot.
Let's say we agree with you that Section 3 is self-executing and that we do have the authority under the relevant statute to keep Mr. Trump's name off the ballot. Should we?
Is that legal? The Supreme Court of the United States will decide. Joining us right now is the man who served in the capacity of United States Attorney General for President Trump in 2018 and 19. Matt Whitaker is also a former U.S. Attorney for Iowa. He joins us to discuss and explain Trump's various legal challenges. Matt Whitaker, thanks for joining us on the Capitol Hill Show.
Well, welcome to Des Moines, Iowa, my hometown.
Absolutely. You served in the capacity of Attorney General under President Donald J. Trump. You were literally the top justice official, top cop in all of America. Colorado and Maine have declared that Donald Trump should not appear on their ballot. From a legal standpoint, should a state be able to simply declare, whether that's a court in the case of Colorado or an appointed official in the case of Maine, declare who and who will not appear on their ballot, act in essence as judge and jury without any defense from the candidate?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it was just a virtue signal for the courts in Colorado and the Secretary of State in Maine to say, that they oppose Donald Trump. Ultimately, this case is going nowhere. I was glad to see the Supreme Court of the United States take it up on an expedited basis. They're going to have the hearings in the beginning of February. I'm guessing they dispatch of it before the beginning of March. There's a lot of strong arguments, and I've read the papers that have been filed so far and the arguments. But I think that the simplest argument that's probably going to get the most votes of the justices is the due process argument, which is essentially Colorado. You ran a process that didn't allow for subpoenaing witnesses, documents, didn't allow for any discovery. You had a slapdash week-long hearing. Then you made these, conclusions. What was the legal standard? Nobody knows whether it was beyond a reasonable doubt, preponderance of the evidence, nobody knows what the legal standard was because again, there was no process and there was no law. The people that advocate for this whole idea of the Constitution and the 14th Amendment, Section 3, seem to ignore Section 5, which essentially says how Congress has to implement and execute the 14th Amendment, and they did, and they passed a insurrection, rebellion crime. And Donald Trump hasn't been charged with that. Nobody's even tried to charge him. Jack Smith, one of the most, as Donald Trump would describe it, vicious prosecutors ever, never even has tried to do that. So the due process argument is pretty obvious to me, and I think it's going to be a fairly large majority of the court that probably picks that as the way to say, if you want to do this and you want to use the 14th Amendment, you're going to have to do it the right way.
There are certain states in the union where one party or the other clearly dominates. Texas, you're pretty likely to get a Republican. In California, you're pretty likely to get a Democrat. If political parties in individual states start determining who can and cannot appear on the ballot for any political party, how dangerous is that to democracy?
Well, it's incredibly dangerous, and our founding fathers warned us of faction. George Washington especially, and others were frightened to death of the whole factionalization that would happen and how politics would corrupt everything. I look at what's happening, and again, where are the statesmen? Where are the stateswomen? Where are the people that stand for the rule of law, the perpetuation of the republic for another 250 years? They just don't exist anymore in modern politics, and it's a shame because at the end of the day, we can fight for what our vision for the country is, but at the same time, we should all be for certain goals. And I think, unfortunately, the left has Trump derangement syndrome. They don't really stand for the same things that the Republican Party does. And right now, it's kind of turning into people hitting each other with sticks. And I don't want that. I really want sort of the rule of law to prevail. I want due process to prevail. All the things that we've been really inherited from generations before us. And we're at a weird place in American history, and that's why if you see me out there talking about it, oftentimes I am talking about these foundational principles that our founding fathers bequeathed us, and that we need to carry on.
You mentioned the 14th Amendment, and we talk about constitutional law, and there was a knee-jerk reaction when the Democrats said, we're going to remove Trump from the ballot. There were certain Republicans that said, well then, we should remove Biden from the ballot. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is how something disintegrates really quickly if that were to occur. You also mentioned the Supreme Court will hear this case. Constitutionally, how do you read it? What do you expect out of the Supreme Court? I
think the Supreme Court is going to dispatch this very quickly because, again, there's really no legal basis. There's no foundation for this idea that a Secretary of State in Maine who was appointed by the legislature can just remove a candidate for a major party off a ballot. I mean, that is not the way it works. And again, process is important. Due process is very important. And, we have to follow the rules. And if all of a sudden people, courts, in Colorado, whoever it might be, can do this and then Republicans can respond without any kind of process, just one person, applying some vague rule, it's a disaster. And I just think the Supreme Court will see that impending train wreck and say, this is nonsense, either do it the right way or don't do it.
There's 9 members on the Supreme Court. You and I both know better than to try to read their minds of any one of those Supreme Court justices, but do you see that as a 9-0? Is it so cut and dried? Is it so clear that all the justices are likely to be in agreement?
Yes, but I think, the current political environment certainly affects the justices no matter how they've attempted to insulate themselves. I mean, if they want to bring this country together, if they want to do the right thing, obviously a 9-0 decision on this due process argument is probably the best way to do that. But, and John Roberts is going to fight really hard as Chief Justice to try to get to a solution and an opinion that doesn't actually address the facts of the case, but, sets this idea, this legal standard, this rule of law standard. But, I could see one of the more recent appointees, especially Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, that she might just be an ideologue. I think that was the fear when she was put on the court, is that she was certainly, an ideologue and not necessarily an independent jurist that sort of says what the law is, not what they want it to be. But we're going to see. I mean, we're going to learn a lot on this case.
Donald Trump's legal challenges go well beyond this ballot issue. He is facing a variety of criminal and civil charges in Florida, in Georgia, in DC, and in New York. Let's start with Florida. I want to run through each of them and get a feel for what they are and then really what the legal basis is. In Florida, a lot of it revolves around his retention of classified information at the Secret Service guarded property that he owns in the Palm Beach area. He was charged by the FBI. I contrast this with Hillary Clinton, who had classified information, in her case, on her own digital server that was later found to be potentially available to China and to others. She was handled like it was old home week by the FBI. Trump was arrested and charged. Is the current FBI treating people the same?
It's a great question. Certainly DOJ is not using a blindfold to apply the scales of justice. You know, each one, I mean, sort of before we get into the individual cases, I think each case is using a novel legal theory to go after Donald Trump. And that's why you're going to see all these interlocutory appeals, as us lawyers call them, which is an appeal in the middle of a proceeding before there's a determinative judgment, you know. And I think as I look at all these cases, you know, whether it's the documents case in Florida, you know, whether it's the January 6th case in Washington, D.C., you know, whether it's the New York cases, each one is applying a statute that was never intended for this purpose. And there's, again, we're going to have to figure out what the law is. You know, I'm a former U.S. attorney here in Des Moines. I was for 5.5 years in the Bush administration. I was a prosecutor, and you know, the road to justice is well worn. You know, we had statutes that have been applied many times. We had case law that was very clear as to what the facts need to be in order to charge these cases. Each one of these cases that has been, you know, used against Donald Trump, novel legal theories.
Just a simple question. If his name was Joe Jones instead of former President Donald J. Trump, would any of these charges be pending?
You know, sometimes hypotheticals are hard because, you know, to some extent, I think somebody that couldn't fight like he can, you know, would not survive even the charges. But, you know, saying that, I think we're going to have to see. I mean, you know, the documents case is a very interesting case, and those documents, you know, and what the Presidential Records Act says. Because, you know, if you read the Presidential Records Act, it says all documents. It doesn't distinguish classified documents from non-classified documents. And I think that's, you know, obviously President Trump probably will be able to have a advice of counsel defense where, you know, he had smart lawyers telling him what he could and couldn't do with those documents. So, you know, again, novel legal theory, we'll see.
You talked about how none of these charges seem to be how they were originally intended. We talked a little about Florida, but let's go to Georgia, where he's been charged with under the RICO Act with what was essentially intended to go after organized crime, but they are saying no, this was an enterprise to steal the election. Is that a stretch, and how strong or weak of a case, setting aside whether or not someone likes Donald Trump, just looking at the factual information that's been provided thus far, how strong of a legal case is there?
You know, I'm not a Georgia lawyer, and so it's hard for me from, you know, Des Moines, Iowa to judge and evaluate what's going on. It seems like it is such a far stretch of how we would have used RICO on the federal side when I was at DOJ, that you just have to wonder, you know, if it's stretched to the breaking point. I think about, you know, in RICOs you have people that took actions that advanced the conspiracy. So one overt act to be part of the conspiracy. And, you know, have like Mark Meadows, who made a phone call to a congressman and was put in the RICO conspiracy. I mean, that was his overt act, was making a phone call. So, you know, to me, I think it's almost a ludicrous case. I mean, it's obviously there's other issues now surrounding it with the prosecutor and the person she appointed, and, you know, and their relationship. But all of that is, you know, in the mix, and it's just hard to know where that case is going to turn out. I mean, obviously there's, you know, Georgia is a purple state now. You know, Joe Biden won Georgia in 2020, but the legislature is red, the governor's red, and I don't know ultimately how that case is going to turn out. I don't think it's on a rocket docket, and we may, the presidential election in 2024 is going to be over by any time that case sees a trial.
Let's go to New York, where there's an odd variety of things, but much of it goes around Donald Trump's businesses there and whether or not they were misleading people, whether or not they lied, overvalued properties in order to get loans and in order to. What's odd to me is there's no question about paying back of these loans. There was no bankruptcy that involved. It seems unusually selective. But again, I'm not an attorney. So when you look at the facts in that case, and I realize you didn't pass the bar in New York, but how far of a stretch does that look to be? If this was Joe Jones instead of Donald Trump, would they be doing the same thing?
You have an attorney general whose office is prosecuting President Trump that the attorney general ran on getting him. And others looked at this case, including the Department of Justice, and passed on this case and said essentially there's no there. And again, it's a novel legal theory. Nobody in New York has ever been charged with this. I know, some real estate developers and real estate folks that are completely outraged by this idea that you could disclose your assets, place a, best guess really, estimate. Obviously if the bank needed to audit the values, they could hire an appraiser and get a better number. It's just, these, and again, I just think these banks that testified said, we wanted him as a client, he paid us back, and we wanted more loans from him. And at the end of the day, there's no victim. Not even the people of New York. And nobody was defrauded. So we can hypothetically talk about what ifs and scenarios, but at the end of the day, I just don't think that's a very strong case. And remember, it's also a civil case. It's, they're trying to then not only, fine him a massive amount of money to try to put him out of business and harass him essentially, but then they're also trying to take his business license to conduct business in New York and therefore make him liquidate all of the assets in New York and kick him out of the state. That just seems so un-American to me and outrageous that it's hard to comprehend. But again, the mainstream media reports it as if it's sort of legitimate.
And then let's look at the charges against Trump in Washington, D.C. They're federal charges, and they're conspiracy to defraud. And it's kind of wide open as to how you can interpret that. We've got a judge there who certainly doesn't appear to like, judges are supposed to be impartial. She doesn't appear to like Donald Trump very well. What do you know? What do you see in that case?
Yeah, I think so the reason, my sense is the reason that case was brought was because the Florida documents case was kind of running into snags, and you had SEPA issues, which is when you're dealing with classified information and how a court, provides access to that and how the, reading people in and getting clearances and, all those types of things that classified document cases involve. And so, Jack Smith took this, I went to DC, got a very favorable judge appointed, and is trying to rocket docket that. Was trying to, the judge was trying to schedule the hearing, the trial to start the day before Super Tuesday, and really, derail Donald Trump and take him off the campaign trail. Because that's, to me, the president talks a lot about election interference and how all these cases are. To me, it's pretty obvious what the left is trying to do. These are only happening in Democrat-controlled jurisdictions. You don't see any Republican prosecutors or appointed or elected Republican DAs bringing any cases in this regard, whether it's in Palm Beach, anywhere, if you just think about how these cases lay out. But, I think, and then, I talk about novel legal theories. This, to me, is the exemplar of that. You're using the Ku Klux Klan Act that was enacted, in the Grant administration to get rid of, people harassing African Americans in the South, and it was very effective. It was the whole purpose of the Department of Justice being propped up originally in the Grant administration. And then you have, two Sarbanes-Oxley, Enron era statutes being applied, two counts for that. And it's just, to me, it just seems like these cases, again, have never been applied to this. And then you have an overarching First Amendment issue where, and so we're testing the limits of, not only we're testing the limits of the First Amendment, but we're also presidential immunity. The president has broad latitude to be president and to conduct business as president, and not then ultimately be prosecuted by the next other party's president that might succeed him. So these cases for a lawyer, I mean, again, we're going to set precedent. There are going to be new precedent all over. Supreme Court's going to be under a lot of pressure, but my sense is, knowing those judges from afar, they're going to see it for what it is, and probably set some pretty strong parameters that help Donald Trump.
What are the chances? What are the odds that he is convicted of anything when all is said and done?
I don't know. I'm not a betting man. And when I have bet in the past, I've lost. And so certainly it's hard to put any odds. I think these judges, if they really recognize reality and appreciate that you got the leading, political contender, especially after Iowa, probably the most, the strongest and most likely Republican nominee, by a 99% chance, to not only win the nomination but win the presidency. You have the Republican convention in the middle of July, and all of this is kind of jamming up against a general election starting in mid to late summer. And I can't imagine that a court of good faith and fair dealing actually, bringing anything to trial before the election. It just doesn't seem like it, knowing the way these appeals are going to have to wind their way through the courts, and how important these appeals are going to be on the immunity question, especially in DC. But again, that each one of them has this unique legal aspect that nobody knows, and a judge is going to make an opinion, but it's going to be a first impression opinion, and it's going to be appealed.
Let's circle back to one thing we mentioned earlier, and that's whether or not justice is blind right now, whether or not justice is being fairly meted out. It appeared from, I mentioned the Hillary Clinton case and how they treated her with her classified information versus how they treated Trump. But even in Russiagate, for example, where immediately after being elected, Trump was accused of colluding with Russia to somehow Russia helped him win the election. As it turned out, after 2 years and $30 million, it was a figment of the Clinton campaign's imagination, a seed they had planted and effectively used for 2 years. So I'm wondering, did you see, when you were serving as Attorney General, or since that time, do you see any evidence? I don't mean the men and women that are out on the front lines of the FBI, but within the FBI, in management of the FBI, is it possible there are people that have a political agenda and that justice is being damaged in that process?
Yeah, and I think that's important, what you just said. I mean, the men and women that are in the field offices all over the country, and quite frankly, all over the world, are, just some of the best of the best. We should be very proud of them, in federal law enforcement. That being said, I think there was a problem over the last 20 years at the FBI where certain politically ambitious folks could spend very little time in the field and promote them, get promoted all the way to the Washington field office or to, the 7th floor at the FBI. And I think that has some challenges. And I would give you one example. Annie McCabe is a prime example of somebody that was, clearly an ideologue that, was wanted to use that position to, hurt Donald Trump. We saw that in the text messages. I don't think any of this is controversial to say it. But, that's just the reality. There were folks that were probably promoted into management and into leadership at the FBI that just, we're leftists.
Final question, and that is, certainly not in my lifetime have I ever seen the court system be so involved in a presidential race. How much impact, good, bad, or otherwise, how much impact can all these legal cases have on Donald Trump's chances of being reelected president of the United States?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it could have an impact. Is Joe Biden going to use it? I mean, is Joe Biden going to campaign on his own Department of Justice efforts to, prosecute Donald Trump? That's an interesting next level kind of concept. I just think it would be unfair. And every time Joe Biden talks about it, I think that is a obvious statement that they know it's helping them potentially. But the American people see right through all of this. And that's, as I traveled around the state during the caucuses, it was pretty obvious to me in talking to my fellow Iowans, how they saw it for what it is was just, political attacks and a politicization of the, the apparatus of the state and prosecutions. And I think that, that there should never be political targeting. Again, you should never put those kind of resources, $30 million in the Russiagate case, and we're going to have millions of dollars spent on all these other prosecutions, and just to target one person and essentially name the person and then try to find out what crime they've committed. I think that's such a perversion of our justice system, and it has to change. We have to get back to the basic blocking and tackling of law enforcement, of investigating crimes, not individuals, and doing justice, wearing the white hat, and putting blindfold back on Lady Justice.
Matt Whitaker, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Tim. Good to see you, my friend.
Trump's various criminal and civil cases will unfold in court in the coming months, but the Supreme Court case deciding whether or not states can remove his name from the ballot will be heard before the court on Thursday, February 8th. From Washington, D.C., I'm Tim Constantine. Thanks for joining us.